I'm Dr. Emma Milne, and today I'm going to be talking about intensive mothering. So what is intensive mothering? Well, American sociologist Sharon Hayes talks about how it's child-centered, so it's entirely focused on the child. That's all a mother does, all a mother thinks about, entirely what occupies and engages her time. It's expert guided, so professionals such as paediatricians, child psychiatrists, nutritionists, anybody who might have an opinion, an expert opinion on how to raise children, that woman is going to be guided by what they are saying. It's emotionally absorbing, so a woman has no other kind of emotional involvement. Her focus is very much on the child and that emotional fortitude and guidance and love that she can give that child. It's labour intensive, so it's something that a woman does that has a huge amount of kind of work and labour attached to it. And of course this would be free labour. Women aren't paid to raise children unless they're childminders. They're not paid to raise their own children. So this level of labour they're doing is not being financially rewarded and is considered to be something they should simply do, again going back to the emotionally absorbing aspect, purely because they love the child. And finally, it's meant to be financially expensive. So raising a child, you need the latest gadgets, you need the best crib, you need the best pushchair or pram, you need all of the best gadgets which all come with a huge financial cost. And that's before we start talking about private education and other aspects which can make raising children incredibly expensive. Now, what does that look like in reality? Well, in reality, it looks like the intensive mother, who is of its nature the good mother. So if you remember in the last video, I was talking about the myths of motherhood, which define the idea of what makes a good mother compared to a bad mother. The intensive mother is the good mother. If you're not an intensive mother, you're probably not meeting that myth of motherhood. You're probably failing to look like the good mother. Now again, just to reiterate, we're talking about myths here. We're not talking about reality. If you're not actually acting like an intensive mother, that doesn't mean you're not a good mother. However, one of the big aspects around how society works and how society impacts on women is that if you're not conforming to these ideas, if you're not relaying to the myths, if you're not meeting those standards, you're going to potentially struggle to look like the good mother and to feel like the good mother. And actually a lot of what we see around how motherhood is constructed and talked about very much relates to this idea of mothers feeling guilty because they're not doing enough. I'm going to come back to that idea in a future video. So the intensive mother is the mother who looks after her child full time. She doesn't have a job, for example. She wouldn't go out to work. She doesn't have hobbies that fall outside of her attention to her children. She is very much focused solely on raising them and doing what is right for them, fulfilling their needs and having limited aspect outside of what she does with and for her children. So I've already said this obviously doesn't really play out in society in quite the same way because lots of women do have jobs, they do things other than raise their children, and yet these ideas, this ideology, this myth of the intensive mother who is the good mother continues to play out and relay in society. So we need to think about who is this ideology serving, because I would argue it's probably not serving women. As I'm going to talk about in another video, women have lots of self-blame. They spend a lot of time kind of doubting their capabilities as a mother because of these myths that relay on them. So where does the benefit lie? Well, I think we need to look at what are women not doing if they're being the intensive mother. So they're not potentially progressing in their careers. They're not involved in political conversations. They're not involved in culture that's taking place outside the home. So for example, being leading musicians or composers or scientists, academics. They're focused on their children. They're in the home. They're not engaged outside of that domestic space. So one of the arguments that's often made by feminists is that the ideology of intensive mothering, the idea that only the intensive mother is the good mother, has the benefit for men in society. It is what we would consider to be a benefit and something that is pushed by patriarchal rule. Patriarchal rule being the domination of women for the betterment of men. So men benefit from patriarchy, women generally don't. So one of the key aspects that we need to think about when we're examining how motherhood is understood and presented in society is this idea of when intensive mothering is presented as if it's the great idea, as if it's the best thing that could ever happen, when it's on the adverts on TV of look who's raising the baby, look who's staying at home and doing that intensive motherhood work, actually, who is this benefiting? It's arguably not benefiting women. It is potentially benefiting men, and perhaps, considering the way in which society continues to be structured, that's why intensive mothering as a myth of motherhood continues to operate and continues to work against women and against the way they want to engage with their children and raise their children.